Hey, curious people, you're listening to the Self-Led in Bed podcast, where we explore our fascinating internal sexual landscapes and discover our authentic sexual selves. I'm your host, Patricia Rich, a certified internal family systems and sex therapist, coach, and creator of the Self-Led Sexuality model for healing, pleasure, and empowerment. I've spent the last 30 years helping people to develop fulfilling relationships with themselves and others. If you're ready for some warm, smart, and juicy conversations, me and my parts invite you and your parts to get cozy and settle in. It's hard to feel self-led in bed when we're flooded with shame and guilt. Yet these feelings are so common in the realm of sexuality, where our most vulnerable needs and desires are exposed to inner and outer judgment. In today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Martha Sweezey, an esteemed IFS therapist, teacher, supervisor, and author. Her recent book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt, is profoundly insightful regarding what Richard Schwartz refers to as the most primal, terrifying, toxic, and motivating of all burdens. I learned so much from Martha, including the difference between parts that shame and parts that feel shameful, adaptive and maladaptive guilt, and how to get in the middle of parts with these burdens in a compassionate and caring way. About two-thirds into the conversation, I played the part of a person who feels shameful about her small breast size, and this role play moved to a real play for me in a powerful way. A little more about Martha Sweezey. She's an assistant professor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, a research and training consultant at the Center for Mindfulness and Compassion at the Cambridge Health Alliance, and a psychotherapist in private practice. She teaches internal family systems therapy nationally and internationally, and has authored, co-authored, and co-edited 7 books on various applications of IFS. So welcome to the podcast, Martha. I'm so honored and excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And of course, your most recent book is about shame and guilt. And as someone who works with sexuality and helps people, get to know their parts around that, shame is so often present in different ways in the system, as is guilt. And I'm hoping today we can, just check in and different ways that might come up, and maybe some ways our listeners can learn a few things about themselves as we go. But before we go any further, I'm just wanting to invite you to notice any parts that might be here for you as we begin the conversation.
I think the main thing for me is that I have a lot to say on the topic of shame and guilt, and I organize myself best on paper. So I'm always, when I'm doing an interview, I sort of am clicking through my mind. Did I get to that? Where's this fit? Am I doing this in the right order? So I have that part who tries to track keeping things in flow.
Yeah. Well,
I don't expect it. I also have a part that says, hey, it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. It's different from sitting down and writing something where you can constantly revise. So.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your naming that part, and I appreciate all it's done. And again, want to also, appreciate that part saying it doesn't have to be perfect. And,
Right.
we will share all the information about your extremely informative book in the show notes. So
Thank you.
that will be available if people are curious and want to learn more. And we didn't cover everything.
Yeah.
We know we have this amazing resource now to point people toward. Yeah. I notice some some parts that are a little nervous and a little excited. I was saying just a moment ago, I've seen your name ever since I've been in the IFS community, on the as an author, co-author of so many different books and articles, and have learned so much from you. But this is the first time I'm meeting you and talking with you directly. So I have parts that just, a little bit of nervous, a little bit of excited, and super excited about what might emerge out of bringing your expertise and my topic together.
Thank you, Patty. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, would you want to share a little bit about your professional journey to this point of becoming, so focused on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually, I got into the mental health field in 1987, actually, and I was a writer before that, and had planned to be uh, a professor in English literature before that until I realized the jobs were drying up. So I made a switch, but I got into I got more interested in guilt initially when I was in school. And I was actually working at the same time and seeing clients, and I was immediately sort of struck by the self-consciousness of people and how important their judgments about themselves were in terms of what was causing them to be in distress. So I didn't know much of anything. I was new to the mental health field, but I noticed that, and I got interested in a theory called control mastery theory, which came from an analyst in Joe Weiss in San Francisco. And I won't go into that in detail, but basically he focused a lot on guilt, on maladaptive guilt, and how uh, destructive that could be for people. And he was in a big debate with June Tangney and some other emotion-focused researchers who were emphasizing shame more. And so I did a lot of reading at the beginning of my career on those two um, emotions and their role in various kinds of symptomatic behavior that people would come into therapy for. So then I ended up working at a place called the Cambridge Health Alliance. I was really interested in community mental health, and Cambridge Health Alliance was a very important community mental health center, and affiliated with Harvard Medical School, and just had a lot of great people there. And I ended up working there in the outpatient department. And it was a place where people were coming through teaching a lot. It was just the hot spot for everybody. And Dick Schwartz showed up there. Well, actually, he showed up in town, and people from the behavioral medicine program said, "Come on, let's go hear this guy. He's really got something interesting going on." So I went over to actually a church on the Cambridge Common, and into the basement, and heard Dick talk about what he was doing, and saw this astonishing video of his work. And that was in maybe 2003 or four, I think. And I had spent many years learning different things, EMDR, DBT, started off in psychodynamic, psychotherapy, family systems. I was sort of in this hot spot for learning, and I studied a lot of different things. And we had such a high trauma population that I always felt like I was looking for more, that it was great what I was learning. There was sort of all kinds of really interesting approaches and ideas, but nothing ever seemed sufficient to me. So I was always on the lookout for something else. And when I saw what Dick was doing, I thought, that's whatever he just did, and I could not figure out what he had done. It was like a magician. I want to learn how to do that. That's kind of
Mhm.
looks like what I've been looking for. And
Mhm.
I had been thinking about shame and guilt both along the way with all these different treatments that I have been studying and using. And and you know, I think I knew that they were both important, and I knew that people had done some important thinking about them, which I found useful. But it wasn't until I got to a model of mind, a plural model of mind, that I could really put together the pieces of what I had learned from my clients and what I had, sort of learned in a disparate ways through all these different approaches to therapy into one piece that was made a lot of sense to me and was really quite straightforward not abstract in terms of treatment options, right? So IFS was the key, the kind of golden key for me to putting together what had been really, I think, the work of my career. And when I got there's a level 1 training, a level 2 training, and a level 3 training. And the level 3 training is just a week with Dick. And I was doing a level 3 training with him after I'd done everything else. And it just kind of dawned on me listening to him talk, that, how you have those aha moments where things come together for you, that the essence of what IFS treats is shame. And I'm actually going to sort of parse that a little bit more, because I don't use the word, I try to avoid using the word shame now, because I don't think of shame as a sort of a noun, as a static emotional state. I think of it as a verb, because I know that either there's a part who is doing some shaming, either internally or externally, or there's a part who is feeling shameful. And those are two different positions to be in. One is a state of being, and the other is an active relational agenda, basically with certain motives.
Mhm.
And that helps me immediately, and I find it helps my clients and other clinicians to unpack something that looks kind of like a rain cloud that's hovering over you when you say the word
Mhm.
shame. It's like,
Mhm.
this doesn't tell me who's doing what to who and why.
Mhm.
So I move it into, a verb. Shame is a
Mhm.
verb.
Mhm.
Um, it's either shaming or shameful.
Mhm.
And I think in terms of parts. So
That is so interesting. Yeah. So I'm just appreciating, first of all, this career trajectory, just from the early days of your psychotherapy career, and then how it's matured and how you've deepened into this, and how IFS offered this key, to really be able to access the inner mechanics, of this, and not just conceptualize it, but be able to really work with it.
yeah.
And um, resonating too with community. I worked in community mental health for 10 years in Chicago, and just can, resonate with the kinds of, complex cases that I'm sure you saw there, and people struggling with all kinds of things. And
Yeah.
your interest in really finding something that would be helpful. And I'm wondering if I could ask you to help people understand for a minute the difference between shame and guilt.
Yeah. That's a really
Um,
good question.
because you
Yeah.
were mentioning that earlier, and then I'd love to hear more about that dynamic, between these different
Right.
parts with shame.
Yeah, shame is you can basically think of it as either shaming, the act of doing this to somebody else, or shameful, the act of feeling this yourself, about yourself, as an identity, is a global assessment of value. All right. So the what we hear, I am, you are, right? Not you do or you did or I am doing, right? It's not do, it's am.
So it's not the
It's a
behavior that you
global
did,
assessment.
it's your
It's a
value, your
yeah, it's
assessment as a human.
as a human being, right? And so shaming goes from a particular feature of somebody. It can be a physical feature or some aspect of their behavior, or supposedly personality, right? That people get shamed for various things about themselves. And the shaming takes a particular and implies something global. Because you have big feet, because you wear striped pants to school, because you talk too loud, because you're not the right gender, you're not the right, your skin isn't the right color, you're not from the right, you don't speak the right language, you're not from this country, whatever, you are something. So it goes
Mhm.
from the particular to the global, to a global
Mhm.
assessment of your or my value
Mhm.
based on this judgment, right?
Mhm. Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And
And
then
it's
from a
and that's
guilt, and
what the
then,
shamer does, right? The
right.
shamer picks on some particular traits or features of a person
Mhm.
and implies that they are therefore have less value or
Mhm.
no value as a
Mhm.
result,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And I have a part jumping on the bit
Yeah.
to um,
Yeah.
connect all these examples that come up around people's feelings about their bodies, their sexual
Yeah.
organs, their appearance,
Right.
how good, if they're good enough, bad enough. Um, and but before that, I'm curious about guilt. So if I'm
Right.
saying I'm my overall worth, I'm a terrible person because of these
Right.
particular things,
Not I'm a
that
terrible person. It might that's more guilt related. I'm a worthless person. I'm
I'm a
unlovable. I have no
okay,
value to anybody. I'm
okay.
defective. I'm too much. I'm too little.
Mm,
That's the kind of shame-based
hmm.
judgment
Hmm.
that people receive in
Hmm.
in shaming
Yeah.
personal interactions, and that's what they internalize, and then what their manager parts who are trying to then contain
Hmm.
the part who's causing the feature of the body or the psychic part that's causing the problem.
Hmm.
Managers will then internalize that and start shaming internally,
Hmm.
right? So
Can
that's
I,
shame. Okay, let me go
right,
on
right.
guilt for a
Yeah,
minute
yeah.
before we go on.
Go on
Okay.
to guilt. Yeah.
Guilt is I did wrong,
Mm.
right? It's about a behavior. It's not about
Mhm.
my identity. It's about my behavior. And guilt can be, I've come to see rather than, there was this argument going on between Joe Weiss and June Tangney about guilt versus shame, which is more important. I've come to see sort of in a dialectic, they're both really crucial for mental health treaters to understand. And guilt can be adaptive. In other words, if I transgress, it's really important for me to feel guilty, right? And it's not good for me to feel ashamed. Feeling ashamed, if I feel ashamed, and people often shame people for doing wrong, right? You transgress, you're going to get shamed. That's a very ineffective technique. You don't want someone to feel ashamed because they'll either withdraw or they'll go into a rage,
Mm.
right? So because there's no avenue for repair with shame.
Mm.
I am bad. I am unacceptable,
Mm.
right? And once you put someone in that corner, they either have to withdraw into that corner to not be seen, or they have to fight their way out of it. Right. So you don't want to put someone in that position. It's not what we should be urging children to feel when they do something wrong. It's not
Mhm.
what we should be telling our spouses to feel when they misbehave toward us or
Mhm.
anything. It should
Mhm.
be, uh, you should notice that you just stepped on my toes and you should feel some guilt about that. I want you to notice that your behavior is not okay, not you. You're okay, but you can't, you have a part who's going to misbehave on your behalf, we could say from an IFS perspective, and you need to get in into relationship with that part and take responsibility for it. So it's not stepping on my toes
Hmm.
on behalf,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So,
but there's also maladaptive guilt.
hmm,
And this is what most people who are coming into therapy are bringing when they talk about feeling guilty.
hmm,
So maladaptive guilt is uh, the state of being, basically, of parentified young parts. So if there's a role reversal in a dysfunctional family, and the child has become responsible for a parent or both parents or other siblings, right? Which is extremely common. It kind of cascades down multi generations,
hmm,
so, with this role reversal. And so the child who's most competent gets picked in the family to be the one who's going to be the parent. And that child will feel a lot of guilt if they don't fulfill that role, right? They haven't done anything wrong, right? But they
hmm,
feel guilty because they are responsible, supposed to be responsible for protecting the adults from their firefighter parts, basically, usually. I
hmm,
have to save dad. I have to go to the bar and get dad when he's drunk and bring him home
hmm,
because, he has to get up tomorrow and go to work. Right.
hmm.
Heard
Yeah.
I've had patients who've said that,
Mhm,
yeah, I just had to go to the bar. My mom would send me out to go find my dad and bring him home. So
hmm,
that he was the parentified kid and he was trying to save his father from his father's firefighter parts, right?
mhm.
And
So
trying to
I'm sorry, I was
no, go
just going to
ahead.
clarify, I guess. So the
Yeah.
maladaptive piece there is that it's not something a child realistically could do. So the
No, the
guilt is
maladaptive thing is he
misplaced.
didn't do any, well, A, it's not his job.
Mhm,
So he shouldn't be in that job. B,
mhm,
he's a child and he can't really be the parent. So
mhm,
there's no way he can actually succeed in this. And D, D, you can't rescue people anyway. So he's bound to
mhm,
fail,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and he has, so it's entirely inappropriate for him to feel guilty about not being able to fulfill this impossible job and a job that he should never have in the first place,
Mhm,
right? But he still feels it. He'll come in with a
mhm,
parentified part who
mhm,
is willing to actually sacrifice him in order because it's been given this job of taking care of other people. And it feels that's the only way to get him even the slightest bit of parenting, maybe, is to try and prop the
mhm,
parents up all the time, right? So it
mhm,
gets really complicated with
mhm,
his parentified manager part, trying to save the parents and and from their protectors and actually his exiles will actually identify with the parents' exiles, right? So there's a kind of a
mhm,
I see my dad is so vulnerable actually, and he's so weak and he's so injured. That makes me feel really guilty if I want to go away from home and not take care of him
mhm,
and not
mhm,
rescue my mom from his
mhm,
alcoholism.
mhm.
So it can get
Yeah.
very convoluted.
Right. Right. And I'm hearing in there, I think also that there's a bit of an attempt to try to get the parenting that was needed.
Right, absolutely.
Um,
But it's by self-sacrifice, so it
mhm,
doesn't work.
right.
It's
So
right.
could the shame set in as well? Could there be a feeling I'm worthless because I
Yeah,
can't
absolutely.
fulfill my job here?
Yes, and actually most maladaptive guilt, I would say you're going to find it's linked to shame. I
Mhm,
did wrong, or I might do wrong, I might fail. Um, I am failing
mhm,
these people who I'm responsible for, therefore I am defective, weak, not enough,
mhm,
too little, whatever, the
mhm.
shaming. So it goes from
Yeah.
I'm failing in an action to I am something not enough, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's the
Yeah.
guilt and the shame. The guilt is
Guilt
linked
and
to
the
shame in
shame.
that case. Yeah.
Hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
pure guilt, adaptive guilt, is really the opposite of shame. It's the action urge is to repair, which is to reconnect and
Hmm.
uh, to make up for. the whatever transgression you've committed against the other
Mm,
person. And
mm,
that's something we need. And if clients come in and have done something like that, they need help to be able
mhm,
to get to the point where they can say, I'm sorry, I need to
mhm,
make a repair, right?
mhm.
That's going to make them feel
Yeah.
better about themselves,
Hmm.
not have to run away and hide and be in a rage.
Hmm. Right, right. Interesting. And I don't know how if in your work sexuality is a focus. If you see it coming up, I know I'm brimming with people popping to mind as I'm listening and kind of seeing the
Right,
repercussions of this kind of early
right.
life burdening, and how that can, play out later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm,
I mean, I work with a lot of folks who have trauma histories. So,
mhm,
sexual trauma, rage trauma, neglect trauma, all
mhm,
those things are shaming.
mhm.
Um,
Right.
and and it's often there a war can develop between the child's parts and their body, actually, if
Mhm,
they've been molested or they've been beaten. The parts can blame the body for this.
mhm,
And in molestation, if the body was responsive, then parts are particularly puritanical and angry with the
mhm,
body for, they think, causing this
mhm,
problem to have happened because little kids are normally, it's a normal developmental stage for
mhm,
a child to believe that they cause things.
mhm.
And
Right.
and so if a kid is being mistreated or transgressed upon by an adult, it's normal for them to go to, I'm causing this,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And it's also safer because at least it gives them some sense of maybe I could do something about it.
Mhm. Right.
Maybe I can take action to stop it. But then
Mhm.
they're left with this dilemma of that goes on of feeling like I caused this.
Mhm. Right. And that again would create that burden. If I cause this, then that must mean I'm worthless or I'm,
If
would
I
that,
cause this, I'm bad. First of all, I'm guilty.
mhm,
And also that I'm shameful because I'm not lovable. I wasn't lovable enough to be treated better than this.
mhm, mhm.
Right? No,
Yeah.
no one
Yeah.
protected me. No one did what parents are supposed to do for
Mhm,
me. Therefore, it must be because I'm not worth as much as other children.
mhm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Something I see sometimes related that I think is related to that is, if some part is desperate for some kind of connection or intimacy with a parent, and the time that that comes through is during a
Right.
sexually abusive episode, and there's parts of
Right.
the child that maybe participate or even
Right.
want or seek the connection,
Right.
then there's manager parts that come in with severe
Judgments.
judgment of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then as
sure.
an
I mean,
adult, the
right.
shutdown of sexual, it could be a total, there's lots of different ways the system might then,
Right.
respond to that later. But it's such a tight and fraught
Absolutely. It's an impossible
dynamic. Mhm.
little dilemma that children are put into in these
Mhm.
relational sort of knots with
Mhm.
adults who are going to exploit them in one way or another. And when the adult, if it's either neglect or some kind of attention at a cost to you, the kid will often choose. I mean, neglect is the worst, right?
Mhm.
So they'll choose some kind of connection that even if it costs them, and then they go on paying the price thereafter internally
Mhm.
with this war over, whose fault it was
Mhm.
and what made it happen.
Mhm.
It can also be not neglect, but rage or 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 complying, you know,
Mhm.
being compliant with some kind of bid on an
Mhm.
adult's part for
Mhm.
uh, a physically abusive, a frightening sort of interaction. Right.
Mhm.
So kids are between a rock and a hard place when it
Mhm.
comes to caretakers making bids for certain kinds of interactions that will they will pay a heavy price if they say no,
Mhm. Right.
or they try to say no.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe right here would be a good place to pause just
Right.
for a moment. And just even for listeners, we're getting into some things here that are so, your insights are so meaningful around this. And I could imagine it might activate parts for some people listening to
Sure.
this too. So I'm just wondering if this, people who are listening might even want to just check in with themselves for a minute and notice, what's getting touched with this conversation, and to take care of yourselves if this is something, that has a particular resonance for you. And you can listen a little bit at a time, or, make your own choices about this.
And
And
also maybe write it down, if something's coming up, take a break, but
mhm,
write down
yeah.
something that you notice about what's coming up for you, because that's a trailhead
Hmm.
for for us when something comes up in
Hmm.
response to what we're hearing.
Absolutely.
It's important. Yeah.
Great idea. That's a great suggestion too. And what I love in this work is how, I forget what word you used earlier, but something that could just seem like just this overwhelming, complex thing, that
Web.
by looking at it this way, you start to get some threads, it's like when you're untangling a knot, and you can start to pull apart some
Right.
things. Oh, that makes sense. Or this is, this corresponds to, my feelings here, or my body,
Right.
something I experience in my body there.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, that's one of the things that I love most about IFS, which is that um, everything makes sense,
Hmm.
right? It doesn't mean a behavior is going to be appropriate or effective or
Hmm.
good for somebody, but whatever their parts are doing,
Hmm.
we'll find out that it makes sense
Hmm.
within some kind of universe for that part, past or present.
Yeah.
And so you're not crazy, right? There's nothing wrong with you. That's a
Hmm.
huge, that was one of the first things I really came to appreciate about IFS, is that looking at psychic multiplicity and validating sometimes pretty crazy looking behaviors
Hmm.
as having real goals and being effective in the short run is extremely deshaming,
Hmm.
right? For
Right.
people who have thought, I'm crazy, why am I so out of control with my behavior and stuff. If it all makes sense, they can calm down and
Right.
and just find out from their parts what's going on and how to help them.
Hmm.
Right?
And with that, I think too, maybe open some compassion for the plight of the different parts
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
well, which
Well,
gives such an
compassion is
energetic
central.
shift.
That's right. It's the central feature of what
Hmm.
we're after. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Something
Compassion being, let me just say this, compassion being, I feel for you,
Mhm.
not I feel with you. I feel with you a
Mm.
little bit. In other words, I get it, but you're not overwhelming me. And I feel for you, and I will take action on your behalf, and I will be there for you. Right? It's a different kind of thing than just empathizing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so important. And when we talk about unblending and different
Right.
ways to help people find their way into a little
Right.
bit more separateness from the parts, or the parts find a way to allow themselves to separate a little bit in
Right.
order to feel the presence, of the person's self. That's
Right. Who
when
is
it
going
starts
to
to open
for
up.
them. Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In your book, you mentioned, um, just this, I guess I want to say, sexual abuse, sexual molestation being at a more extreme end of the spectrum, that lots of us, I think probably all of us in our socialization, go through a process of learning what's allowed and not allowed in terms of our bodies, right? What we can
Mhm.
show or touch or take pleasure in and around whom and
Right.
right. And so there's those forces of socialization, whether through
Right.
parents or peers or siblings or a school or religion.
Right.
We take in a lot of learning about that, right? And I was just interested in, I mean, you were, saying the war with the body, but kind of what happens for people in their relationship to their body parts based on that kind of socialization.
Mhm.
And I know I run into a lot of shame, people just feeling a lot of shame about
Mhm.
how they're, well, certainly comes up with like touching early body exploration,
Mhm.
masturbation being, met with, someone's shock or revulsion or
Right.
anger, and then kind of what gets internalized in the system around that, just as an example.
Yeah,
That,
that's a good example of being
yeah.
shamed
Hmm.
and believing that A, there's something shameful about your body, and B, there's something shameful about you for
Hmm.
having explored your body in this way. Some part of you has to be, contained
Hmm.
and inhibited.
Hmm. Yeah.
Shaming is essentially an inhibitory
Hmm.
behavior. You're trying to inhibit yourself or somebody else,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And firefighters who are disinhibited are responding to shame, to too much inhibition.
Hmm. Can you say more about that? Can.
Yeah, that's a kind of essential basic polarity. And when you see disinhibition in someone's system, you should think, well, how fierce are their managers? How you should be asking them to notice how powerful their inner critic is, because the
Hmm.
firefighters is indexing their response level to an internal phenomenon usually. I mean, the external
Hmm.
phenomenon may have been there and it may still be there in some way. They may
Hmm.
still be live in a dangerous situation, but they also have internalized it and they have
Hmm.
a critic that is, got the volume up to 10.
Hmm.
So if you see real strong firefighter behaviors,
Hmm.
AA understands this,
Hmm.
that internal shaming is a central feature of heavy use of alcohol or drugs to
Hmm.
self-soothe and
Yeah.
turn the volume down.
Would perhaps another example of that be if somebody maybe is raised in a very strict religious upbringing
Mm.
where, maybe there's no sexual contact permitted until
Right,
marriage, and maybe then it's under very prescribed circumstances, and maybe there's a lot of tight limits and boundaries.
right,
That so then a lot of manager parts have jobs to contain
right,
those behaviors and maybe even thoughts and emotions. But then on that, when you say disinhibiting, there might be another side where that person maybe watches a lot of pornography or has
right.
parts that act out in other ways
Yeah, I
that
mean,
are very, yeah.
how often you just watch the news, because how
Mhm.
often do you hear that someone who is a big proponent of anti this or that, some kind of
Mhm.
sexuality, who's been caught at a truck stop
Mhm.
having sex with, people with strangers?
Mhm.
It's really common uh,
Mhm.
that the people who are loudest in one direction are actually have a
Mhm.
secret life in
Mhm.
another direction, and who they're really trying to contain is themselves
Mhm.
with this huge divide, right?
Right, right.
But they share the sentiment with other people in a way
Mhm.
that's quite destructive.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I sometimes ask people in the groups that I lead at the beginning, just in terms of actually even just deciding what they want to disclose to other people, because we
Mm.
do have a lot of needs for privacy and a lot of fear of shame and embarrassment
Mhm.
around sharing stuff personally about
Right.
sexuality, is I kind of ask people to kind of feel in their bodies, like what is shame, what does it feel like to feel shame, to
So I would
feel
I would I would invite you to use the word shaming or
shaming.
shameful. What is
Mm,
it like to feel shameful?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a part who's doing some shaming
Mm,
internally to cause
right.
that shamefulness to ramp up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the
Yeah.
cycle, is that managers, a manager will have the job of shaming,
Mm-hmm.
and the exile will feel hotter in terms of their sense of shamefulness. And
Mm-hmm.
then a firefighter will come in to disinhibit with some kind of distraction or self-soothing thing to prevent actually suicide often. So it's
Mm,
kind of a life-saving measure
mm-hmm.
to cool off this hot thing that's heated up over here with
Mm-hmm.
shaming.
Mm. Yeah, great. I will do that. I will be more
Yeah.
specific with that. Yeah. And then how
People
does
get it. No,
embarrassment, how does
no.
embarrassment anywhere on this spectrum, or is that a
Yeah.
completely different
No, embarrassment,
realm?
there are synonyms. There are a lot of synonyms for feeling shameful and embarrassment. Feeling embarrassed is I guess most people would consider it a slightly lighter, more, kind of social environment. I tripped when I was going up on the stage to speak, or I couldn't remember my lines or whatever. And I was embarrassed, or I said something that I think was dumb at a party, and
Mhm.
everyone looked at me. So later I was embarrassed. Now, you know, what looks like embarrassment to other people, I turn bright red, might actually be life-threatening by the time I get home,
Mm.
right? Because
Because of the shamefulness, the feelings of
because I have a
shamefulness.
part, depending on how fierce my internal system is about my social presentation. For some people, it might be, oh, well, and they forget it in a minute. For some people, they might not even be embarrassed because they're basically not that shame-based.
Mm,
But for other people, what looks like should be a slight embarrassment can become life-threatening.
mm. Because
So,
the
it's
critics are
really
so harsh, the shamers are
harsh
so intense
internally.
internally, and that
Right,
brings up those firefighter parts that
right,
might feel suicidal or want to engage in extreme
right.
self-soothing.
So I might go home and get drunk,
Hmm.
but that would save me from actually killing myself, right?
Hmm. Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so there's a hierarchy of, I think of firefighters the ones who get most vilified, the ones who
Mm,
are drinking too much, drugging too much, having promiscuous sex,
mm,
whatever, watching too much porn. Those parts are look like the bad guys, right? People get mad. Why can't you control yourself? Why can't I control myself? But they're actually performing a life-saving act.
mm, mm. By cooling down
Yeah,
the humiliation or that shamefulness
right. They're
in,
turning off the furnace that is going
yeah.
to blow up. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we look at, something I talk with people a lot is the vulnerability associated with various stages and types of sexual relationship, an
Mhm.
encounter. So some people will just avoid any kind of interpersonal sexual connection because the fear of activating
Mhm.
feelings of inadequacy, shamefulness are so
Right.
great that doesn't seem worth the encounter. So
Right.
that avoidance, I think, can be one of those firefighters or maybe even managers, that just say best not to go there.
Yep.
And then during sexual
That's
activity,
inhibition. That's likely to be a manager. That's like a part who says, we'll just avoid.
we'll just avoid, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for someone who maybe has such a need to feel successful and desirable in bed that if they've,
Mhm.
whether it doesn't matter if it's a long-term partner or a hookup, but there's a very strong need to feel like they have performed or they have made their partner come, they've like really thrilled them.
Right.
And if the other person isn't sexually responsive in the way that they want them to be, or their own body doesn't, they don't get the erection they wanted to get, or they're not able to
Yeah.
be as whatever, um, then there can be this intense feeling of, would we say, shamefulness there? If someone has these exiles that already,
Well, there's a part who's doing some shaming internally,
mhm,
right?
okay, hmm,
In order to that kind of calls up, that sort of opens the door to a storage. bin that's already full.
Mm,
Right? The I don't know what the best metaphor would be. You've got a cellar full of
mhm,
shamefulness,
mhm,
and then you pour some that's flooding with shamefulness, and then you pour some
mhm,
more water down the stairs,
mhm,
and it starts leaking up onto the first floor. You
mhm,
become aware of it, and it calls
mhm.
for emergency measures. How do I keep the first floor from flooding?
Mm,
Conscious mind,
right,
right?
right, right. And right. And so then you get these other parts that might show up. So maybe I'm going to act like nothing, I'm going to detach or act like nothing.
Or
I
I'll
can't
rage
talk
at you.
about
I'll,
what
I'll
happened or
blame
I'll
you.
rage. Yeah.
There's all kinds of
Right,
options that
right.
firefighter courts have. I'll go
Hmm.
get drunk. I'll blame you. I'll
Uh,
I'll go take some Viagra and pick up somebody
mhm,
else.
mhm,
Whatever. Um,
mhm,
there's an endless number of options for
mhm,
trying to counter
mhm,
that what has become an internal phenomenon. So people can't
mhm,
escape it
mhm,
because their critics go with them, right?
mm,
They can't just leave that situation where they didn't perform well and
mhm,
feel okay because it's happening inside them.
mhm. Yeah. Something else then that this might, we'll see if you're ready to go here. We can
Mhm.
hold this one to the side for a minute, but the experience of being a partner to someone who has a lot of shamefulness in their system and has these kind of like, it does feel like kind of a life or death need
Mhm.
for something to go a specific way. And then
Right.
the amount of pressure that that can put on the partner, and then how much they may disconnect from their own genuine needs or their own yeses or nos
Mhm.
because of their own fear of like activating
Mhm.
the shame in their partner and maybe even their own, if like they weren't able to do the thing,
Right.
that their partner needed them to do. So this starts to be not like lighthearted.
No,
It,
none of it's lighthearted. This is
it
not
starts to
lighthearted.
not be
No.
so
Yeah.
lighthearted. And again, I guess I want
Yeah.
to differentiate because there's people who really, depending
Yeah.
how burdened their system is, and based on all these different kinds of early experiences, this could be extremely heavy and very
Mhm.
difficult to parse through,
Right.
but can be addressed, and healed through this process. And
Mhm.
people may be resonating with this at a somewhat milder level, like maybe it's not
Mhm.
as extreme or as
Yep.
life-threatening, but maybe can resonate with how, gosh, if I have parts that really expect me to be perfect. And if I'm
Right.
not, I do get this really heated feeling,
Mhm.
or I at least have an impulse to want to disconnect. And
Right.
how do I help myself stay?
Right.
Um, you
Well,
know,
one of the things I'll just observe is that we have a culture that is very, very reliant on substances for intimacy,
mhm,
right? It's starting with kids teenagers, when they start becoming sexual. There's a lot of substance use
mhm,
to grease the works, and adults, do the same thing. Many,
mhm,
it's really part of our culture
mhm,
to titrate intimacy and and exposure, exposure of the body, exposure from being
mhm,
intimate
mhm,
with substances.
mhm. And
Um,
how do you see that playing like to kind of reduce the vulnerability maybe, or to
yeah,
create
absolutely.
a bridge into like the courage to
Yeah,
become more
absolutely.
vulnerable?
It kind of turns off the shaming part,
Mhm, mhm,
lowers the volume on that,
mhm,
and lets some parts who want to have more contact do it, but sometimes in a way that then just ramps up the shaming later on when you're sober,
mhm,
right? So,
mhm, mhm,
so it's a real dilemma. But I think that the rate of substance use among college students, for example,
mhm,
just is like a trailhead for our culture around the issue of internalized shame.
mhm.
And and
Right.
and I'll go on from there and just say that
Mhm,
we live in a culture, late stage capitalism that feeds uh, on consumerism, and it's based on consumerism. And
mhm,
consumerism feeds on on our sense of being inadequate, deprived,
Mhm.
needy, right?
Mhm.
And we know when we feel those feelings, what comes
Mhm.
up is protectors, right? We know
Mhm.
that in IFS that parts who will go shopping, parts who will,
Mhm.
try to be very worried about our appearance, parts who will,
Mhm. Yeah.
focus on how we seem to be, not how we feel.
Right. I really appreciate your bringing in that larger cultural context,
Yeah.
and there's so many industries around um, and surgeries and all kinds of things,
Yeah.
body enhancement or labiaplasties, or the number of people getting labiaplasties has skyrocketed.
Right.
Um, my penis is too small, too big.
Mhm.
People usually
Right.
say too big, and my penis is too small.
Yeah.
Not to mention just bellies and
Right.
that this constant
Body
influx of
shaming
body
it
shaming.
sells things. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, that's can sometimes be, I think sometimes we know that, but we don't know how that actually lives in our system, because it's part of the water,
We swim in.
we swim
Absolutely. Yeah.
in, and it's a pretty radical step to say,
Yeah.
gosh, what do I actually, how can I recognize what I've taken in from the outside and that I don't really want or need? And is there some way to kind of send that out, those cultural burdens, those, um,
Right.
yeah.
And I'll say, IFS is sort of tailor-made for this
Uh-huh.
exploration because
Hmm.
it's not, we're generalizing now, but IFS does
Hmm.
not generalize. It's
Hmm.
it's helping you as an individual
Hmm.
inquire internally into how your parts have responded uniquely to your experience and what beliefs
Hmm.
they developed as a
Hmm.
result of it, and
Hmm.
what works for you and what isn't working for you,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
what you can let go of.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I love that reminder of the specificity of it. And I think people listening, some folks listening here, probably are tracking closely and know this model well. And there may be people listening that are newer to this. And I almost wonder how it would be to demonstrate a little bit of an inquiry if I were to, not a full session, but just a little bit of what it might sound like. Would that
Sure.
be possible if,
Yeah.
say, I'm here saying that, you know, I I feel like my breasts are too small and that
Mhm.
guys aren't going to like me.
Mhm.
That
All right.
I was told my whole life. I could tell you all the times I got teased. I was flat as a board. I was this. I was that. And I'm
Mhm.
really so. I mean, I'm just getting into role here a little bit. And
Yeah.
how might you talk to me about
Yeah.
that?
Well, what I would say is, uh, hey, Sharon,
Mhm.
so what do I hear that you have a part who's saying that your breasts are too small, you're too flat-chested. Is that right?
Mhm.
And that
Yeah.
part says, everybody says this, so I know
Mhm.
it's true, right?
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah,
saying, oh, I've been
it is
hearing
true.
that. It is
Mhm.
true, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
So that part is very present with you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then there's another part, or maybe it's that part, who says you should do something about it. Is that right?
Mhm.
Or what happens?
Well, I mean, I've been reading a little bit about things I can do to get, implants or,
Mhm.
something done, or I don't know if I even want to do that because then I hear it's not so healthy sometimes to do that. But then does that mean I'll never be with anybody? Like nobody's going to really want to stick with me.
Got it. Okay. So here's what I'm hearing, that there's a part who has absorbed a lot from being teased and feedback in some situations in your life, which says your body isn't right, right? Your breasts aren't big enough.
Mhm.
And then there's a part who says, well, maybe we could do something about that, and goes and reads up and does some research on how
Mhm.
to fix that. And then there's another part who has some worries about, there's some medical complications that can come along,
Mhm.
but that maybe that's not so smart. So
Mhm.
do you hear anything else
Yeah.
about this?
Yeah. Maybe a little hopelessness.
Okay, so there's a part who feels hopeless, like I'll never be
Hmm.
loved, I'll never have a partner,
Hmm.
I'm
Right.
not good enough,
Hmm.
my body's not going to be attractive enough
Hmm.
to make me, appealing. Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So which of those parts needs your attention first?
Um, Probably the hopeless one.
Okay, where do you find it
Hmm.
physically and on around your body?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's probably right here, like in my heart, chest area.
Okay, all right.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. And as you notice it there, how do you feel toward it?
Mm. Well, the first thing that came up was just sort of like a like a
It kind
feeling
of
like a
makes everybody
bleh.
feel hopeless, huh?
It just feels bleh. It
Inside.
feels
The,
yucky. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's sounds like that's how the hopeless part feels. And when it kind of takes over
Hmm.
physically, that's where
Hmm.
that dominates. Is that right?
Hmm. Yeah.
It's
And I think
discouraging
it
for
kind
other
of
parts.
exhausts everybody. I think all like it's
Right.
sort of everyone gets tired when this one
Got it.
is
Okay.
here. Hmm.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see this hopeless part or if more feeling it?
I was more feeling it, but there's maybe a little bit of sort of like a brown gray kind of blicky color that
Lucky
goes
color.
with it. Yeah.
Okay. What shape is that blacky color?
Hmm. Um, it's a little hard to say. Sort of like an oozy blob or something.
Mm,
Almost a little like wood, like a wood green kind of
yeah.
pattern in it a little bit. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. How big is it?
Hmm. Somehow I'm getting the phrase it's like a loaf of bread, like the size of a loaf of bread.
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. So let's put that part, which is showing up in that way,
Hmm.
into a room
Hmm.
and invite all your other parts to, they can go, they can hang around if they want, they can
Hmm.
hang back,
Hmm.
go somewhere else entirely if they want. They don't really have to, you're going to handle this. They don't have, it's not their responsibility. Okay.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay. And then you stay outside that room for now.
Hmm.
Make it a comfortable, safe room for the part, but you
Hmm.
stay outside. And then notice how you feel toward the part now.
So I'm kind of looking in at it, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
How do you feel now toward it?
Hmm. Yeah, I am a little curious, like where it came from, or
Okay. Is it all
yeah.
right to go in the room with the part? Anybody object to that?
They're okay as long as they don't have to go. The other parts don't want to go, but I
Yeah,
can
they
go
don't have
into
to
the
go.
room. Hmm.
Okay. All right. Just you. Yeah. Go
Hmm.
ahead and see if the part notices you.
You notice a chair. I kind of want to go sit in the chair.
Okay. Go ahead. Sit in the
Mhm.
chair.
I mean, it's not saying anything.
But does it seem to notice you?
Mm,
Is it aware of you?
I think so.
Ask it.
Yeah, now it kind of looks like a whale or something, and like I'm looking at the side of a whale.
Okay.
Mhm.
And ask it if it is aware of you, that you're in the room with it.
Mhm. Yeah, getting sort of a little nod.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay. And
Mhm.
and how does it respond to you?
Seems sort of resigned
Mhm.
to being in the room.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
Right. So let it know that you're curious and that you're here
Hmm.
to help. You're
Hmm.
not here to just look. You're here to help out
Hmm.
and and ask if it would like your help.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of seeing like almost like the big thing popping almost and some kind of room or like some sort of being in there.
Okay. There's a being in there. All right.
Mhm.
So say
Yeah.
hi and and uh, ask it what it wants you to know.
Hmm. I don't know what it wants me to know, but I'm seeing almost like kind of like a 1950s like guy by a telephone talking to someone on the phone.
Okay, then it wants
Yeah.
you to know something about that. So
Hmm.
ask it,
Hmm.
do you get that, or do you need to ask what the picture is?
Yeah. Kind of wanted to ask about that. sort of like a worried person on the phone getting bad news from a doctor or something like that.
Okay, so
Hmm.
what does it want you to know about that?
Yeah. Mm. Um, something that mm, something that it wants for me, or maybe some connection to, uh, yeah, I might be making up a story here, and I'm, trying to see what comes around this. Yeah, something about
You
breast
don't have to make.
health, almost like a mastectomy story, like something about
Okay.
breast health, mastectomy, something a long time ago, something not
Mm.
mine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, does this make sense to you?
Hmm. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does. Okay. So
Yeah.
let it know in what
Yeah.
way it makes sense. Let the part know in
Hmm.
what way it makes sense.
Hmm.
And see if there's more that it wants
Hmm.
you to know.
Yeah. So it's almost like there's a part that's been equating breast size with breast health or something, or some
Oh,
kind of
okay.
fear
Okay.
there, maybe some legacy stuff.
Okay. So legacy
Yeah.
stuff, meaning
Hmm.
that this doesn't come from your experience. It comes from
Hmm.
somebody else, some ancestor's experience.
Hmm.
Is that
Hmm.
right? Okay. All right. And what does the part want you to know about that?
Hmm. Um, that what it kind of feels like is there was sort of like a, oh wait, like that isn't you kind of thing going on. Almost like,
Yep. Okay.
oh, that's not, oh, that wasn't you. That's this, it's almost like this floated in almost like this,
Yep. Okay.
the
Yep.
not have the flat chest sort of bringing in this part that was someone who maybe, lost their breasts or had to have their breasts removed. And then,
Right.
yeah.
So something really distressing and scary connected to having a flat
Mhm.
chest.
Mhm. For these parts, and I'm
Illness.
noticing
Yeah.
them. I didn't know they were there. And now it sort of feels like it's almost like floating off a little bit.
Right. Okay. So
Hmm.
ask your part, if there is a part of
Yeah.
you in the room too,
Hmm.
if it's
Hmm.
attached to this stuff that comes from somebody else.
Hmm. It's kind of relieved, like, yeah, we don't need that. I mean, it doesn't feel
Okay.
like it needs it. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Hmm.
So then it's ready to just send it out. It's been
Hmm.
sending it out. Is it gone?
Hmm. Yeah. And it's funny, it feels like there's some other updating too about kind of like in that era, like it feels like it was more important for women to be seen as having large breasts to
Right.
be desirable than it feels like there's a little updating almost
Great.
happening in my system. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of body shapes and sizes and just not quite the same as it was before, with the
Hmm.
kind of
So
Marilyn Monroe
make sure
era.
every
Yeah.
open the
Yeah.
windows. Make sure
Yeah.
everybody's
Yeah.
hearing this. Okay.
Yeah.
All your parts to take this in, this updating.
Hmm. Yeah.
That was something that
Hmm.
came through your ancestral line to you, but it's
Hmm.
not your experience.
Hmm. Right.
Not something you need to
Hmm.
be carrying around or
Hmm.
believing in.
Yeah, I'm sensing sort of like, and it's almost subtle a little bit, but sort of like a bit of more relaxation in the other parts. Like, oh,
Great.
okay. It's not, there's just something less.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So now I want everybody to uh, just know all your parts. Okay. You and this part can go out of the room.
Hmm.
Join everybody. And I want everybody to notice, all the parts to notice their relationship to your body.
Hmm.
Right? And they may be different,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. It's funny. I see a little part now that's sort of talking back to people who teased me when I was younger,
Hmm.
like, so what, or like,
Right.
well,
Standing
you've
up
got
for
this,
them.
you've got that, like not, yeah. Hmm.
Right. Great. Okay. And how are you feeling toward all
Mhm.
your parts now?
Yeah. Um, it's funny, I was gonna say sort of puffed up and I almost feel like my chest
Hmm.
coming forward, a little more
Yep.
perky, which is interesting too, right? Because just the little bit of slumping or shame, like shame
Right.
can actually create
Yep.
a
Feeling
slump,
shameful is
which
causes
actually
people
then
to
shrinks like
change
the breasts
yeah,
recede,
that's right.
right? And
Yeah.
so there's something that actually feels a bit courageous, like
Hmm.
to stick out my chest feels a they
I'm
makes my
here.
breasts feel bigger and it's also a little more assertive, like
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
Hmm.
right. So let them know
Mm.
uh, you're getting
Yeah.
that they're feeling more
Mhm.
present in the body,
Mhm.
more
Yeah.
content in the
Hmm.
body.
Hmm. And something about them all wanting to be able to help me know when it's actually safe to fully,
Embody.
embody,
Yep.
have my full chest, lifted and out. And when,
Right.
if they don't feel like that's as safe, that they can
Right.
let me know.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So does that feel complete for the
Yeah,
moment?
it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was it like to
Yeah.
do a little
Mhm.
inquiry like that?
That was really, really interesting to do. And, it's something that I started with that isn't exactly my thing,
Right.
but I've worked with people around, but it very much tapped
Mhm.
into something that's my thing and
Right.
became very embodied,
Yeah.
and a lot of truth in my system coming through with that. So that's always an interesting
Yeah, that's what
thing.
happens with role plays. You go from, their problem to my problem. Yeah.
Yeah, very powerful, and also just
Mhm.
really appreciated your guiding, and
Mhm.
yeah, I do feel lighter, and
Mhm.
yeah, so and I'm just really grateful for that, for people to have had a chance to listen to that, because to speak to that specificity, that
Right.
we can talk all day about IFS, but until you're able to witness the process of it, it sometimes doesn't quite come through what it actually is, right? That there's a
Right.
very respectful inquiry, engaging the parts, right?
Yeah, it's particularly important when we're talking theory and we're presenting sort of a model of mind. And it's important for people to know that we're not imposing that
Mhm.
in when we talk to clients, that we're simply sort of guiding people to pay attention inside and then
Mhm.
asking questions about what they're noticing
Mhm.
and guiding them to pay more attention, right? And to
Mhm.
listen and to without reacting or
Mhm.
judging,
Right.
so they can actually learn what's
Mhm.
going on inside. And it's not something that we're imposing.
Mhm. Right. Right. And so imagine then, to if I was now stepping into a situation where maybe previously, as the person who just did that piece of work,
Mm.
might have felt, something we learn in IFS is that protectors, this is a tricky one often, and you spoke about it really well in your book, which is that our protectors don't ultimately protect us from the thing. They actually often, ironically, bring about the thing that they're concerned about.
Right.
Right. So if I have a part that's keeping, so wants to be in connection, but keeps me out because of fear of that kind of
Mm.
shamefulness,
Shaming. Yep. Shaming from somebody else.
shaming
Yep.
from others, or the
Right.
shamefulness I would feel if I
Right.
encountered someone
Yep.
else that was doing that, or my own inner shamers.
Hmm.
If I'm
Absolutely.
free of that, then I'm able to show up
Right.
in a much different way,
And have more connection,
and have
which is
ultimately the
what your
connection that the part
protectors
was
want.
looking
Right.
for.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've worked a lot.
Protection
Yeah.
is protection. Protected parts are young, usually.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
not, you're often maybe much older than the parts they're protecting. And
Hmm.
they always, it's kind of a rule, they
Hmm.
always create more of what they dread most.
Hmm. Right.
Not meaning to, not
Right.
intentionally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Wow. So I wonder this actually in this piece of work, this came up, but if you could say something about the intergenerational nature of shame and
Mhm.
how that could get passed down, that it's not always someone's own lived experience, right? Like, what do you see with regard to that?
Well, that's a really interesting phenomenon. I mean, of course, we grow up in families and communities and institutions that teach us all the time. Kids are constantly being taught, right, by grown-ups what they can and can't do, what they should and shouldn't think, what they should and shouldn't pay attention to, what they should and shouldn't feel. So there's a lot of instruction that's going into this very plastic mind, brain that is just like a sponge and picks it all up. So we're very affected by maybe within the family, maybe outside the family, but wherever we live and whatever kind of community we live in, um, we're individual, we're unique, we're going to respond to it differently, but we're constantly having people who are trying to influence us around us as we grow up. And depending on what those those adults were taught themselves, I mean, usually sometimes people break away from what they're taught and they very purposely don't do that. They say, I'm not going to teach that. I don't believe in that. I'm not going to do things that way. But often, rather unconsciously, the assumption is just that I will bring up my children the way I learned how to bring up children from my parents, and that's how it's done. And I will do that myself, or I learned from my community what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. It's hard to be an iconoclast, right? And to kick yourself out of a community and to go think independently and find a different community or whatever you're going to do if you're going to break the rules. And so some of us do that in some ways and not in others. Some of us do it more than others. And some of us are feel much cozier staying within the parameters that we were brought up in. So we're constantly saying to children, do be this, don't be that, do be this, don't be that. And we're saying it, we also punish the parts of the child who are like the parts of us that we punish, right?
Mhm.
As a parent. So if I have a part that I consider particularly weak and unacceptable socially, if I see that in my child, I'm going to start getting udgy and try to give them a hint that that's not a good. Don't be that. Don't be like that. That's not a good thing. That's not going to get you anywhere in life, right?
Mhm.
Be something else, right?
Mhm.
So it's inevitable, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's how we
Right.
and inhibition. If you just think of shaming as inhibitory efforts,
Mhm.
that inhibit and efforts that inhibit negative. It can be positive too. It can be you're so great, when you put on your tutu and your ballet shoes, and you're not so
Mhm.
great when you put on your blue jeans and go get muddy, you
Mhm.
know. And
Right.
so it's not like the kid is just getting negative feedback. They're getting positive feedback but only
Mhm.
for certain things.
Right. Right. Right.
Right. So the
Mm.
other things are being inhibited. Right. So it doesn't have, I mean, we all do that. We're going to do that with our kids, not meaning to be bad parents. Um, it's our job to keep kids from electrocuting themselves and running in front of cars. And, we want to keep them alive. We want to keep them
Mhm.
socially engaged so they don't just alienate other kids when they get angry and stuff. So we're trying to shape them. And The more that shaping has been done with us through a sort of very negative inhibition uh, kind of style, the more we're going to pick that up and have a part who just a protective part who does that internally and does that externally with others who we're supposed to guide, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's so really the job of a parent is not to be perfect, but to become aware of what their parts do to them
Mm.
and inhibit in them, and the ways in which some parts then rebel against that and disinhibit, and not projecting all of that onto the child who is going to have some things that are very similar to you probably and some stuff that's really different. Right. So
Yeah.
letting kids be themselves and still keeping them alive is kind of,
Right.
the project
That's the
for a parent.
project, right? And right, and trying
Right,
to really approach them with love and kindness as much as possible within the
right.
shaping and the teaching.
And with respect, which is the opposite of
Hmm.
shaming.
Hmm.
We need to have a lot of respect for our children, for who they are and for discovering who they are as they
Hmm.
discover it. We're going to discover it. We don't, that my child isn't me, and I
Hmm.
have to wait around and find out who she is, you know. So tolerance for the discovery process.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well, I'm wondering, there's so much here, and I feel like, there we could go on all day, and we
yeah,
also need to wind down
yeah.
soon. And I'm wondering if are there any shortcuts, any quick tips you would want to offer people if they're resonating with
Mhm,
aspects of this conversation, and particularly toward the end of wanting to feel more self-led in bed? If
mhm,
there's, I don't know if there's any quick
mhm.
tips or shortcuts that you would be able to offer.
Well, I mean, I think the shortest cut, which may not be short, um, is to notice your parts and to then notice if you're reacting negatively to them and notice if they're reacting negatively to each other or to your body and get in the middle of all that, get in the middle of it without judgment, without agenda, other than I'm here for you and we can sort this out. You have clearly been hurt and you didn't deserve that, and I'm here to help you um, find out what happened and recognize what happened and validate your right to exist and to be who you are, and I'll be here for you as we go through it and after the fact too. I'm here for you now.
Mm,
That's what we're saying to our parts, and
right.
we have to really pay a lot of attention. It takes a lot of noticing to
Mm,
find out who's doing what to who and why, and
mm,
get everyone to calm down and get in the middle and sort out the muddle kind of,
right, right. Yeah, I
because
love
it's a
that.
muddle
And
as we
it can
grow
be a
up.
real
We have a muddle.
muddle.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I want to add, sometimes we can do this on our own. And oftentimes it's really helpful to have someone else there holding the space
yeah.
if it's a complex situation in there, which it often is.
And if it's scary in there, if
Mhm.
you have both a harsh critic or harshly powerfully reactive disinhibited parts, it can be scary to pay attention to that because you're afraid of activating it, and getting everybody going again without knowing how to be in the middle and help them. And in that case, if that's true for you, pay attention to that, honor that, and get someone to help you do that, because it's not, you shouldn't do it alone if it threatens to be too much to do it alone.
Mhm.
Be careful.
Mhm. Yeah.
Use your intuition to guide you about
Mhm.
what you should and shouldn't do in terms of helping yourself or getting help from somebody else to help yourself.
Yeah. And that might lead us to um, sharing with people how they could access your work or your resources. Do you want to say anything about that? And we'll also put things in the show notes.
Yeah. Well, I have a website, which I can give you the link to if I didn't. And on that it kind of describes and lists all the books I've written and podcasts I've done. And I don't, I mean, I have a small private practice, so it's not, um, occasionally I have openings, but probably not. So right now I don't. So, but you can go to the IFS Institute, and and they have a listing of all the folks who've been trained in IFS and what their level of training is and whether they're certified. And so you can find people. There are more and more people getting trained, so you can find people. And uh, you know, just don't be persistent. If you want help, it can take a while to find the right therapist, but stick with it, because it can be it is often transformative
Hmm.
and wonderfully
Yeah,
liberating to do.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
And
and also, Dick is doing more ketamine assisted um, retreats with a woman named Sunny Strasberg. So if you're interested in going that route, ketamine is the only legal um, psychedelic in this country at this point. But um, people can, and probably locally, if you're in Boston or New York, you can find people who are ketamine assisted therapists who are training in IFS
yeah,
that can
yeah.
speed
And
things up.
some other, I know in Philly we have some folks and,
Right,
it's spreading. So the
right,
accessibility increases each year, it seems.
right.
Yeah. So Martha, I'm so appreciative of all the amazing thought work and healing work and writing work, and mentoring work that you've been doing. And I'm guessing you work a lot. And I wanted to ask before we end if you wanted to just share something that you enjoy for pleasure that is outside of your work life.
Well, I like hiking a lot, and and, uh, and swimming. So I live on the coast of Maine, and I can do both. And I like to go places to hike. So I'd say that's a favorite thing.
Mhm. Lovely. I just made my first trip to Maine this past summer and just loved it up there. And
Yeah, it's beautiful.
yeah, I would love to do
Yeah,
more hiking up there myself. So thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Self-Led in Bed podcast. Check us out at www.patriciarich.com/podcast, where you can sign up for a free guide to the 6 S's of sexual self-energy. Until next time.